And I wore my shirt today. I remembered my shirt. It says, "A cake is a lie," several times. My friend's fairly certain that's the number of times the text actually appears in the game. Alright. Oops. I left the browser window open and it's playing an ad. But at least I know that the stream did start. That's kind of why I leave it open. But I usually mute the sound as it comes on. There you go. So, yeah, I could see. Okay, it's muted now. It's good. Alright. So we are ready to go. Let's turn the sound back on. I am presently in TeamSpeak with Amadorns.
Hello.
Is that how you pronounce your username?
Well, I guess. At first, it wasn't meant to be pronounced in English, but you can call me Ama if you want.
Alright. And then, at the moment, that is the sum total of the TeamSpeak channel. There may be more later on joining us as we go. Alright, so I promised, and I shall deliver on that promise, to demonstrate a bit of the LookingGlass API. I demonstrated a bit on my last stream, but I kind of want to dedicate a stream to it so that the information is all kind of collected and together, and we can have just one video on it where you don't have to skip portions of the video because I go talking about something else. And this is the API as it stands now on the first public release of the LookingGlass API. So this information is current and useful. The information from the previous stream lacked a couple critical pieces of information anyway. So you need that if you want to play with the API. Some other notes is if you're if you're trying to use the current Mistcraft with older LookingGlass or newer LookingGlass with older Mistcraft, it's not going to work because when I did the switch to the public API change, I changed the names. So the old API or the old versions just kind of stop. They don't match up with the newer things. Older Mistcraft will go, I couldn't get a proper API instance, and we'll just go without. Older LookingGlass will be completely useless for everything except for slightly older Mistcraft here. So yeah, I've actually archived those builds on CurseForge, so you can't even download them anymore. So hopefully that will actually try to limit confusion. Alright. Chat asks, how long have you been a fan of Lewis Carroll? Charles Dodgson. I'm not exactly a huge fan of Lewis Carroll, in that I'm a fan of Lewis Carroll. I mean, the writing's good and everything. I think most people are, though, at that level. I've honestly never read the entirety of Alice in Wonder, or Down the Rabbit Hole, or Through the Looking Glass. I've never read the entirety of either of the books, so I don't know if I could actually call myself a fan of Lewis Carroll, but if I am, then I guess all my life. What camera are you using for the face cam overlay? My second C920. The first one died, but it was dead when it got here, so not really the fault of the C920. Did you just get a Steam message? Yes, I did. I shall rectify that situation presently. Away! Foul notifications! Do not plague us with thine pinging. Alright. Yes, I didn't archive the old versions of Mistcraft because they're still useful. But they won't work with newer versions of LookingGlass. It'll just go I couldn't get an API. So yeah, not a big thing. If you have versions of it, fine. Those versions will continue functioning as they do. Alright. Is LookingGlass source on GitHub now? Not yet. I still have some cleanup I want to do. There's particularly some things in the history that needs to be cleared out and cleaned up. I'm basically just going to flatten all the history to initial commit when I push it to GitHub. But there's also some things for some code that needs to be cleaned up, whatever. I'm very particular about my coding standards, and one of the reasons I haven't open sourced Mistcraft is I don't want people looking over my shoulder. That's really kind of the biggest reason. But for LookingGlass, I want to, I definitely want to open source it, and it will be up sometime in the very near future. Alright. Okay. So, last thing for startup, if you can guess the flavor of the day. Streaming with milkshakes. Okay, so now to actually get to the actual API introduction stuff. I may highlight this. So, I'm gonna try and get a thing here, please. There we go. Alright. So, the LookingGlass API is a bit complicated to get into, but once you've got it, it's fairly reliable, which is why it's built the way it is. One of the usual problems we have with modding APIs is that when the mod that provides the API updates, it may create changes in the API that breaks things in your integration of that. Of course, one of the reasons we provide an API for a mod is so that you don't have to reference the internals of a mod. Really, you should never reference the internals of a mod, just their API, because if you reference the internals can change however they like. And if you reference the internals and it changes, it's your fault when it breaks. So don't do that. So just use a mod's API. Technically speaking, a mod's API should never create breaking changes. You should be able to rely on that API until the API is completely removed. There should be a good bit of warning for that coming up. And when it's removed, it should fail softly, in that if the API has changed or removed something, then it should basically just go, sorry dude, can't do that. So, yeah, the design of the API is a bit roundabout. Definitely more complicated than most, probably all, mod APIs. But as strange as this seems, or may sound, I mod for the fun of it, and therefore I write code the way I feel like writing code, which probably means I will over-engineer things. Let's look at the guesses for my milkshake flavor real quick. Pancakes. That's a fun guess. Milkshake flavor. I suppose that's technically correct. Vanilla chocolate chip. Sounds good, but it's not. Strawberry. No. I do like strawberry, but it's not. Banana. Not this time. Wait, you're in Finland, aren't you? Fermented shark flavor. That would be Denmark, I think. No. Well, actually, several of the Nordic northern regions do that, but it's actually probably more Iceland would do that. All right. I just have people guessing. Okay, so the first thing you have to do in order to get a copy of the API, an instance of the API, is to request the API instance provider, which is already a good hint that this system is roundabout, if not terribly over-engineered. So what you do is you send this line. You'll have to change this part of it here. So this text here, in order to match what it is in your specific case. But this is basically send a message to LookingGlass. The message is just API, just as a string. And then the string message that you send is the full class path and then a function. And the function must take an instance of API instance provider as its only parameter. API instance provider is defined in the LookingGlass API. It is defined at the root level of the LookingGlass API. And it is rather thoroughly well documented because it is the entry point to working with LookingGlass. So the way this is to be used, you get this instance and then you use it to request an instance of the API you want. So this can provide several different kinds of APIs at different versions. That's the best part of this system. That basically we could provide, if you're looking for version 3 of the, well, let's say we were doing Mistcraft, the version 3 of the Symbols API, you would request version 3 of the Symbols API as symbols-3. Or symbol-1 here is the example. This means that you can get the version of the API you know how to work with. The design is actually kind of based out of how Android handles its API versioning. Chocolate is involved in the milkshake. And vanilla ice cream is involved in the milkshake. But there's one more critical ingredient, and it's starting to... There we go. Mixed again. It separates a little. Alright, so... Not that one yet. Alright, so we'll go down here. So you request the API and version of it that you want as symbol-1, and it really is how Android handles its API versions. You literally request Android-16 or 19 or whatever you're using. And there are 3 exceptions that can be thrown, and we will get to them. So, example usage, the API actually includes the message to send. So if you just want to copy paste it, it's here. You'll need to change this part still, but it's there. And then the code for handling getting the API you want is here. So an implementation of register is provided. You get the API instance provider. You ask it for an API instance of, in this case, we're asking for version 3 of the Awesome API. I have no idea what functions the Awesome API provides, but they're probably pretty cool. So you would then get an object instance, or an instance of something as an object. Don't cast it yet, because that's not safe. If you do get something, you know for a fact that it is what you requested. It is guaranteed to be of the right interface and everything for version 3 of the Awesome API. It will match. Guaranteed. However, if you cast it here, then you run into the problem of that casting relies on the definition of the interface in the LookingGlass API, let's say. If, let's say, later on, a couple years down the road, the Awesome API now has version 12. We no longer support version 3 because that's a long ways back. So when you're actually building this function, Java goes and figures out all the things it needs to know about in order to understand the function. That means if you did the cast here, so if I actually had Awesome3 and I did the cast here, then it would go and find Awesome3 using your imports at the top. If that doesn't exist, it's going to fail out. We don't want it to fail out that way, because that's a really hard failure. And will probably bring down the game and so forth. What we want to do instead is use a different class for casting. And this class is basically, its sole purpose is to handle the process, or what we do when we get that API instance. So I actually have my example here. I do exactly my example in Mistcraft over here. So I get an instance of the View1 API, and this is the core critical information you need to actually use LookingGlass API. It is the View API, and you want it at version 1. So I get it as an object, and then I double check to make sure we're client side, because I don't actually care to use it server side. And if we are, then I call this function. And oddly, it doesn't bother to check if the function exists server side. When it does building and things, this function cannot exist when building this function, because Java's not that particular. I don't know. You can do some weird arm's length things, not at full arm's length, which is interesting. But yeah, so using this class, I just have a static function in there, and all it does is it casts the API instance into an instance of the View API, iWorld View API, which is the main LookingGlass API. It has all of one function. And then I pass that instance of the API to my dynamic link panel renderer, because that's going to handle the stuff, and I don't worry about it past that point. When things get more complicated down the road, I'm going to have to wrap this and set it up so that I can use multiple versions of the API, whatever. At the moment, it's fine. So, yes. That's the example. Let's go through the exceptions. There are 3 exceptions that it can throw. The first is API undefined. If we were to actually request the awesome API from the LookingGlass API instance provider, LookingGlass will go, what? And throw the API undefined exception. In this case, the API we requested doesn't exist. We should probably just give up with a nice log message and go, LookingGlass has no idea what we're talking about. I don't know. There's lots of reasons for why that may happen. 1, you may have typoed. You may have asked for the awesome API instead of the awesome API, because, you know, they're right next to each other on at least most keyboards across the world. So that's an easy typo to make. You may actually be several versions ahead. Let's say that in 3 versions, LookingGlass starts providing and it will provide a new API fairly soon. It starts providing the render API or something like that. I don't know what to call it. Maybe provide a portal API, which might be intelligent. In which case, you may, with your mod, throw in the thing for, okay, I want to be able to use this portal API because it's, you know, cool new stuff. But when you request the portal API from LookingGlass, LookingGlass goes, I got no idea what you're talking about. Because LookingGlass is, on the instance you're running in, 12 versions behind, and, well, can't be 12 versions behind if you get it too soon, but, you know, it's far enough behind that the portal API hasn't been added yet. That just means on this instance, it doesn't know. So give up with a nice log message and say, we don't know where this API is, we're just going to go on without it. Unless you really, really need it, in which case, I don't know, figure out a way to fail nicely. Okay, the second exception is API version undefined. What this means is the API we requested exists. However, the version we wanted has never existed, or rather, we have no knowledge of the version you wanted. Let's say that, same example really, we add some neat new things to Looking Glass, and we create a Vue version 2 of the API. And your mod updates, and you go, okay, I'm going to use this new version 2 of the API, and then when it's running, we can get to this point if, in that instance, it's running an older version of Looking Glass, and version 2 doesn't exist yet. So the API you requested exists, but the version you wanted doesn't exist yet on this instance. So this generally informs you that you can try falling back to some other older version. And then the last exception is mostly for, there's a proper word for this, but it's basically forward thinking, and it's to try and support backward compatibility far down the line. That the API requested exists, but the version you wanted doesn't anymore. So let's say that you have a mod that uses the Vue API at version 1. But a year from now, we remove version 1 from being supported. It's no longer available through the request system. So in that case, Vue would still exist. We'd have version 12 or something like that. But the version we wanted is no longer supported. Again, fail with a nice log message, and do something to try and encourage people to tell you to update, because that means that you're way out of date. You may need a poke. Alright, so that's that. At the very least, leave yourself a log message, because you'll get to some point and go, why is this no longer working? Oh, because I haven't updated my Looking Glass integration in a year. That's why. Alright, which might be intelligent. Yeah. Ironically, I made some comment about Z and S being close together, and there's somebody whose username is Dvorak in the chat. Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of how this should work. So let's get to some actual usage examples of the API. We've got an instance of Vue API. We know it's version 1. So let's look at the API a little bit and see what we've got. Again, the iWorld Vue API at version 1 has all of one function. I'm tempted to make it so the version number equals the number of functions in the API, but that probably won't go well for very long, because that only means that the moment I remove a function, we go downhill. Literally. But we have this one function. What it does is it creates an iWorld view for us. This iWorld view is owned by the mod that creates it. It's actually, I think it has some internal reference to the mod that created it, in fact. One of the byproducts of this system is it's possible for Looking Glass to keep track of what mods have a copy of the API for it, and to kind of specialize these API copies to the mod. Specialize goes so far as to put a name in it, so that if something fails, we can figure out who failed, or who was making the call when it failed. Just helps for tracking things down. Mistcraft uses this to great extent. Looking Glass doesn't really have a lot of need for it. But yeah, so we create a world view. The world view is the workhorse of Looking Glass. It is how we keep track of the information we want, and how we pull the information in order to draw things, and so forth. So we specify what dimension we want, where in the dimension we want as chunk coordinates. These will be copied the moment you pass them in. And then resolution. This is for the render to texture rendering. Technically speaking, you're not required to use the render to texture rendering down the line, but at the moment LookingGlass is useless without it, so you probably want to pay attention to how to use this. And then it returns an iWorldView object for your use. And it discusses a little bit here the grab and release mechanics. I will go into them in more depth, but that's basic reference counting, is what grab and release are for this case. Okay, so let's look at the actual iWorldView API. I've not actually created any commenting for these classes themselves, just the functions in them. Maybe I should have, given them a bit of commenting. I can do that later. Alright, so grab does what it says. It grabs the object, which kind of it increments the reference counter internally. That's how it functions. But you can think of it as kind of a metaphorical putting a hook in it so it doesn't go anywhere. In this case, Java already has the reference counting thing going on, but there's no easy way to keep track of when something goes away from the code. So the reference counting is here so that we can clean things up properly. Release is the same thing. It removes the hooks. You need to call release equal to the number of times you call grab, and if you never call grab, you need to call release at least once. You're not required to call grab. You may want to call grab when you first get the object. That way your reference counting will be in step kind of thing. If you don't call grab and you call release, technically when it releases it will be at -1 for reference counting. Nobody ever grabbed it, but it will also function okay this way. It only matters if you want to be able to grab and release it several times, and then eventually when you're done with it, like really done with it, release it. It'll be okay. This is most useful if you want a distributed sharing system, but if you have a map cache kind of thing for your worldviews, then you can get by with just releasing it when you're done with all references to it. But then you've done the reference counting external to that too, so yeah. So yeah, the reason this exists, and I have some features in mind in order to make this less error prone, but the reason this exists is so that resources get cleaned up properly. At the moment, if you don't release it, the frame buffer and things like that that are created for each view just kind of hang around. This is, of course, wasted memory, and it's OpenGL stuff, so you really want to clean those up. It's a lot like pointer in C++. This is a C++ pattern. The grab and release thing is reference counting taken straight from C++. I just couldn't come clever in Java because reference counting isn't a thing in Java. But I really needed a way to keep track of when resources should be released. It's the same thing for why you have to call file.close in Java. Because there's no easy way for it to determine it went out of scope, the object should clean things up itself. It's one of the things I miss in C++ when working in Java. The ability to actually have resource initialization is... No, resource allocation is initialization. That you create an object that basically wraps the resource, and when the object goes out of scope, it frees the resource. It's a smart pattern, but you can't do it in Java. Alright. So enough complaining about languages. Alright, so... The next function is kind of the most important one, which is why it's the next one, I guess. These are first because you really need to pay attention to their existence. The next one is the one most people will care about in order to get things working. getTexture provides the identifier for the OpenGL texture that you will use when rendering. Since LookingGlass uses a render-to-texture for the world, you get just basically a bitmap. It's a texture, and it's ID'd. So you just tell OpenGL, I'm going to use this texture, draw it. Done. And I will show an example of how to do that in a few minutes. So then the next thing we need to know is how to tell LookingGlass that we want it to update that texture. Normally it just renders it once and then it waits until you tell it, please create a new frame. You can do this every render frame, but you need to tell it to. You do that by saying mark dirty. Again, fairly standard naming, especially within the Minecraft modding thing. It's a common function name. But this is just sets a flag that it needs to be redrawn. It doesn't erase the texture. You can continue drawing the texture. You can mark it dirty before you render or right after. Doesn't really matter. But that way, that's how LookingGlass knows that the texture needs to be recreated or rebuilt, redrawn. The next one is ready. Is ready. This is true once the... I misspelled ready in the comment. Oh well. So once everything's ready, in terms of chunks are available, and we've rendered the texture at least once, that's when it's ready. You can use this to determine if LookingGlass has finished building the view for you. And until the world view texture is ready, you can do something, temporary. Render this nice loading thing or whatever. I have a black panel that just kind of does a burn-in effect once ready. That's it. The last two functions have to do with camera animation. The world view uses a camera object internally in order to render the things to texture, and this allows you to animate that camera. The function down here literally exposes the camera, well, sort of. It's a interface that provides various functionality, some information about the world around it, some information about the chunks. I will leave that to people that are really interested in how animations of things work. But basically, it allows you to move things around as if it were an entity. There's some things that are named slightly differently. And, of course, the interaction is slightly different in that a lot of the time you could just set the yaw for an entity, and you can't do that here. iViewCamera is not an instance of entity, so don't try casting it to one. The next thing here is the set animator. And this allows you to set the animator for the animator. Marvin the Martian. The animator for the camera. Mistcraft uses this to set it to the pivot animator, which is built into LookingGlass as an example animator. So we can look at the interface for this. It's got three functions, which I didn't comment all of them. Oops. The first one is something that the animator gets the look at target, and it gets it from the camera. You don't call this. In fact, you don't call anything on a camera animator. It's something so you can provide logic to LookingGlass to use, that you can give it to use. There's a lot of passing around there, isn't there? But it's a bridge, basically. So that's for... you can implement this function so you know where the camera's supposed to be pointing. Refresh is provided so that it can rebuild its logic. This is called whenever the world around it has changed. Chunks have loaded, so forth. It should be reasonably light, but it doesn't have to be super fast because it's not likely to run every frame. And then update is the animation tick. It's called every render tick, and it will update the position of the camera based on what the animator does. Or rather, it just tells the animator, update the position of the camera. And that's how that works. So let's look at an example. This is built, this is available through the API. This is a existing class. You can extend it if you want to create some more advanced functionality. And what this does, this is the pivot animator that Mistcraft uses. It's just built straight into LookingGlass to make it available for everybody to use, and it's nicer there. So we keep track of our camera object. We use that when we're building it. We keep track of the target that the camera is supposed to be looking at. And this is again set by the actual iWorld view thing. That's because you can say when doing this, chords can be null. And that really should be made apparent here. If null world spawn is used. So that can be null. That way you don't have to know where the world spawn is. It's taken care of for you. But the end result then is that you need the target told to the animator. Taken care of. It's here, but that's why that's that way. Chat's going, where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom! How long have you coded in Java? Since I started modeling Minecraft, basically. So, December 2011. I'd coded in Java before that, but not a whole lot. It was mostly this foreign programming language for me before that. Yes, this is going to be on YouTube later for reference, which is going to be really funny for people watching on YouTube going, yes, it's on YouTube now for reference. Alright, so next, the update function for the pivot. We check to make sure we have a camera. If we don't, then something went horribly wrong. But, yes. If the camera is null, then die. But we update, we basically, whoops, we add the current delta time to the yaw for the object. This uses the, it's the same functionality basically as the entity's set angles, which is terribly named in MCP. It's really add rotations, which is why it's called add rotations in the camera. Or iView camera? iView camera. I named these all this week, basically, so I don't know them yet. The iView camera calls it add rotations, because that's what it is. And then set pitch allows us to just set the pitch directly. There is also set yaw. And then we calculate the x and z coordinates based off of our radius, because it's a circle radius. It just spins in a circle, does this. And it looks at the point, so it can be looking down, which provides a really nice effect. But it's really simple to do, code-wise. And then refresh rebuilds all this thing. So if the target's null, then we don't know what we're supposed to be looking at, and we can't possibly figure out how we're supposed to look at it, so yeah. We then have things for... Basically, we have these presets. There's some predefined presets. This is getting a bit meta. These are just some empirically nice values that worked well with Mistcraft. In practice, this works fairly well for a look at pivot. That's it. If you want to change the look presets, or have your own presets, or just have one preset or whatever, then you can change it so that, because it pulls the presets from a function, you can extend this class, override that function, provide your own presets. Done. I'd recommend making it a final static just so you're not rebuilding an array every time this wants to rebuild. And then it goes through all the presets, checks to see if that preset works, so it's a priority order. If the first one works, we're going to go with that. So we're going to go with the first one of these presets that actually works. And the definition of works is has no blocks completely blocking the radius. There may be some minor clipping things in there that it was kind of some really picky things, but which at most you'll clip a corner. And when it finds a preset that works, it sets that and returns. If it does not find a preset that works, say presets is 0 length, or none of them worked, then you can set something as the default. The default, God, these are meta, is a up of 1 and a radius of 3. So what you're probably used to from the Mistcraft link panels, because that's what they were defaulting to. I had the presets just turned off in the earlier versions of LookingGlass. They're on now, so the pivots will change slightly in what you're used to seeing for the renders for your ages. Sorry if you were particularly fond of some of those views. Lots of the time you'll wind up with the 1-3. It's the fourth thing in here, and it is the default. But you may wind up with a lot of ages that do up to out 5 now. Especially things that are open in general. The funny thing is the overworld one now. In my test world, you remember we could see the world, the room I was standing in. You can't see in the room anymore. You see the building. It zooms way out and pivots around the building, which is really cool looking actually. I liked it. I couldn't quite shake the mist music from my head when I was looking at that render. It was perfect. What programming language do you teach your students? I do C++, basically. Presets are presets. The default doesn't block the blocks. Yes! Yes, actually. You got it. So this is how this works, in a nutshell. There's a whole bunch of things down here for checking if things are in path and so forth, and it's all kind of lots of check heavy. But it kind of does what it's supposed to do, so we'll leave it. Alright. So that is animations. Now that we've got a iWorld view that is both ready and animated, let's see if we can draw it. So let's look at the dynamic link panel renderer. This is Mistcraft using the API. So if you remember, we went from here. I could have just done this. So go straight to here. We have the API instance, and we create a random object. So when using the views, again, be sure to release them when done. The dynamic link panel renderer keeps track of a single active view. This means if you open a book, close it again, open the book, close it again, open the book, close it again, you're using the same view. It's not actually creating a new one every time. This is slightly... It's kind of a real cheap way of making it so the server doesn't have to resend the same stupid chunks again. And when I say stupid chunks in this case, I literally mean stupid chunks. I'm not using stupid as kind of a filler word. Because the chunks are made stupid. They're simplified. They're cut down. Modern C++ or pre-2004 C++? Modern. As much of it as I can try and figure out usually. But yeah, C14 when we can manage it. but honestly, this last time the teacher and I were both going, we don't know enough C14 to really talk about this intelligently. C11, most of the time. There's still some things about C11 I go, oh yeah, I forgot I could do that. So yes, let's see here. So we release it when we're done, and we know we're done with the view when our link info changes. For Mistcraft, this is a couple different things, but basically I'm going to simplify this to we're no longer looking at the same world. Create a new view object. So we release the one we had, and we set it to null. We then check to make sure we're actually looking at a dimension and everything's fine and hunky-dory and whatnot. Funky? Everything's funky. Fine and hunky-dory. Huh, I wonder if that's where the word funky came from. Probably not. But it worked really well. So if active view is null, we don't have an active view, but everything's ready to go in terms of we have something to look at, we create one. And we use the API to do that. Create world view. The dimension we're looking at, where we're looking, could be null. Link info get spawn can be null. It defaults to the world spawn. And then the resolution that Mistcraft uses is 132 by 83, because that's what fits in the panel. Could be whatever you like. I could double this and get a higher resolution image, but there's no particular reason to do so. I may add a config value to allow doubling that. So
I have to go.
Okay.
So I guess I will see you tomorrow.
Ciao.
If you are around on TeamSpeak, if not, well, whenever.
Yeah.
I'm
Bye.
really liking the API, by the way.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, see you.
All right. So we then check to make sure the active view is not null. I don't know that it can actually return null, but apparently I'm playing it safe here. You probably should too. But if it's not null, then we grab it, because like I said, you should probably grab it. And then we set the animator to a new camera animator pivot. Every camera should get its own animator. Do not try to reuse animators, because the target thing is kind of important. Yeah, Amadorna's was pretty loud there. Sorry about that. I had it turned down, but apparently it wasn't enough. The number after the C, talking about C++, is the difficulty level of finding and identifying its stealth features. Alright. I then... This is just kind of stuff for Mistcraft to keep track of if the view has changed. I then set some things for my shaders, and if we're ready. But we're not ready yet. We haven't been ready yet. So then if the active view is null, bail, because we're going to try and use it from this point forward, and if it doesn't exist, oops. Alright, so active view, get texture. If the texture is 0, something went critically wrong. Fail again. Technically speaking, I don't think this can actually return 0. I think that the texture is built beforehand, but some of this code is from older versions of LookingGlass, before LookingGlass was LookingGlass, so it's probably just playing it safe again. If you want to play it safe yourself, you might want to include that check. And then this is stuff for determining the book damage, which is used for the shaders. Right, and then I do some ready checking. We check to see if the active view is ready. If the view is ready, then actually, interesting note. It tries to render it before ready if shaders are turned off. I found the bug! Huh. Alright. Else, oops. Else bracket. If not ready, return. Or something. Actually, I'm gonna have to do something else, but I don't know what it does exactly if shaders are turned off. But yeah, if it's not ready, then we don't do this part. But once it's ready, and we've not been ready before, we set ready to true, and we set the ready time to be right now. This is for the shaders again. And then, as long as the ready time is greater than or equal to 0, we calculate the time since it was opened, so current time minus ready time, and we actually apply a factor to it. And then we use that for this. And this is just shaders calculations. It's for determining how the different things should be applied. If you've not seen them, go punch a book and then look at it. The panel renders differently. Alright. Gotta love finding bugs while explaining things. Yeah, it's a good way to find bugs, I guess. Talk through the code and go, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Oops. But yeah, we should to do if not ready and shaders off, render black. I don't know what it will render if shaders are off and it's not ready yet. It's a little hard to test on my machine actually, but we'll see what I can come up with here in a little bit. Alright, so let's get down to some basic actual rendering here. The shaders are probably unimportant to most of you. So we use the texture ID, which we've pulled from here. The ActiveView get texture. This is the texture ID. We bind that texture, start up our tessellator. This part's just whatever you want to set it to, really. Whatever works in your case. And then we draw the vertices with UV. We just do basic tessellation. We draw a rectangle where we want it. This is a GUI rendering here. One of the interesting notes is my shaders flip things around. I didn't really pay attention to that. But they do. So, again, well, Shadow King wrote the shaders, and the shaders are really nice and cool, but he apparently wrote them so it flips things upside down. I'm going to try and fix that at some point, I guess, but at the moment the easiest way to fix it is just to draw the thing the other way, if shaders are enabled. So here we do this, and we actually render the same vertices by location, because that's how OpenGL knows what's front-facing. But we change all these. We invert the ones and zeros on the y-coordinate, so it goes this way. But yes. XCOM quiz. How long have you been able to use a wrench to rotate the book stand? I don't know. Sorry for hitting the table. I shouldn't do that. How long have you been able to use a wrench to rotate the book stand? I don't remember. I added that when I added rotatable ink mixers and rotatable book binders and things like that. When I added my rotatable code, I went, let's make everything use this, and let's make it actually have a function that handles rotations from other things, so that other things can rotate my blocks. So that works now. Poor table. I'm sorry, table. It's okay. I didn't damage it in any way. should drink my milkshake. I should pour my milkshake all over me. Apparently. Ladies and gentlemen, XCompWiz has developed a drinking problem. And managed to do an airplane reference on stream. Alright, so... I made a mess. Fortunately, that can be rectified. It's really an ice cream smoothie, if you want to be technical. Alright, so that's pretty much everything in a nutshell. That is what LookingGlass provides right now. It is still rendered a texture. Let's load this up real quick. Yes, there is milk in it. There's milk, there's ice cream, there's chocolate. Like chocolate syrup. But nobody's managed to guess the other ingredient yet. When are you going to release the A Drinking Problem mod you developed? Well played. Alright, so let's show you some stuff. XCompWiz should make a milkshake mod. Alright, so that's Slidercraft over there, and I'm playing with things, but let's come back over here. So this is... You can see we're actually slightly further out than we were before, I think, for the panel render here. It's basically the same though, it just renders that world. If we come over here, we can see another world. This is still rendered as texture, that's still the way it works. The doors rendering thing over there, and you actually can see this is rotated off at an angle, because I'm playing with rotations for the doors at the moment. Or the portals, I should say. It's not doors, because it's not the doors mod. I don't want to create that link, because that seems unfair to iTunes. But yeah, so... more worlds. Let's see if I can find a world where something's going to be slightly different. Alright, so this is one where we're actually looking at it from a very high angle. Because that's the first one that worked in the presets. Mostly because there's lots of things close to the spawn-in point. There's a bunch of trees nearby. And then, this one... I was testing surface lakes and ironically wound up underground. In this one that's really dark, you probably can't actually see anything there. But yeah, it's in a cave, which is why it's so dark. And it's actually also doing a very, very vertical look. And then let's look at... This is an interlinking book to the overworld. It may also be disarm, I don't recall. And if it is disarm, then I need to fix my lightning effect. One of these two here is disarm. I don't know which. But since it's actually the same location through two different books, I'm actually reusing the same server data. It's not having to pull things from the server again, which is nice. But yeah, we can now see the building. And in my head, I hear the mist music. Because it is... That's exactly how it should look. Manuel McFry is commenting, I've been waiting for this since Mistcraft came out. Yeah, I'm not surprised. He then actually says, and now everyone's going to tell me this isn't actually that new. Well, it's not a month old yet, so it's pretty new. I do need to fix my lightning effect. Okay, maybe we'll do that, but I'm going to switch streams for that because this is supposed to be... well, I can still highlight and export that to YouTube, so maybe we'll do that. My goodness, you look a lot like your brother. Yes, I know. Alright. So it's a book that links to the same age. Yeah, the interlinking links to the same age. Okay. Alright, and then Slidercraft is over here doing things. We're in debug mode, I think, I hope. So I'm gonna switch to code real quick and change that angle. Which is fun. This is cool. I can see the game over on the stream preview, even though the game's on this monitor. But I'm looking at the code on this monitor, so I can't see the game. Anyway, let's go change, turn off the rotations. Yeah, where is it? It is somewhere. It's gotta be somewhere. No, I'm apparently not in debug mode. I am in fact not in debug mode, so I'm not gonna be able to do that. Never mind. Dare you to use one of the intra-age linking books. Alright. Pick one at random then, shall I? That was not the, disarm one. Ha! There must be a portal somewhere on your monitor if you're seeing stuff twice. I think, actually, that the stream preview counts as one, yes. Now can you mod the game cursor to be the pointy finger? You mean from Mist? Oh, yes. No. Probably not. I would be worried if XComp and Soren didn't look similar. Fair point. Joke on him, neither are disarming. It would have been funnier if they both are. Hild player responds, my plan has been foiled by random chance. Alright, so... yeah, I think that's that. Are there any questions for the API? I'm going to kill this. Switch back to Eclipse. And... there's a lot of to-dos in this one. I want to show it on the stream. It's icky. We'll launch that again in debug mode. Someone wanted to ask about the camera logic. Well... ask? Right, so... one of the things commented again, chat brings up a good point. The entities and block updates and things still aren't synchronized. I have not got there. I've been more focused on getting it so people could use the API. But now that that's a thing and people can do that, I'm going to put more into getting that working. One of my testers responds, my question is, what should we test? At the moment, I don't know. Does everything work? No, you've found some things that don't work. I have to fix them still, so I don't know. How free is it? Is the question for the camera. If you want to move the camera around some, that's fine. One of the things is that the server predicts which chunks you can see, specifically what parts of the chunks you can see, and only sends them. So if you want to try and move the camera around a bunch, then you may actually exit the area that is loaded. Let's demonstrate. So this is a nice portal render into the other world here. We're interestingly a block further back than we were previously. So this is another dimension. And if we were to try and move this camera out, so I'm gonna switch over to the code real quick. Render portal slidercraft, and I'm just gonna make it slide in a direction here. Maybe I can find where to do it. There we go. Needs to come in before here. Alright, so... Whoa! That wasn't what I wanted. That got interesting fast. Moved the wrong thing. So that render is live. It is a very live render. The data is stale in that if something changes in that world, then I'm not informed of it on my client, but the render is done live. That's why the perspective can change. Alright. Talk about sliders. I will. For those that were watching for API stuff, we probably concluded that, and I'm going to highlight the segment that was API stuff and put that on YouTube as reference material. If I can figure out how to remove the clips where I'm talking about my milkshake, then I'll do that. I may actually... I've also got it so that it's recording to my local machine. So I may actually just edit the video on my machine and then upload it to YouTube as reference material. That might be better. How do the player-based portals position the camera? Does that work in multiplayer? It's all client-side. The rendering's all client-side. Yes, it will work in multiplayer. Alright. So, I was trying to make the view move a bit. So I'm just going to move it by increments manually here. So you can kind of see we're moving off to the side here. And if we move a bunch, we're still in the range, but you can kind of see that something off to our left isn't really there. Move further along. We're now still moving the same direction. I moved a big step there. Alright. And here we've reached the end. The, Yep, I can't interact with that. That's the stream preview. So you can actually see some chunks aren't there. They're just not loaded. The client has no knowledge of those chunks. They won't show up either because the server isn't there. Alright. Is it particle to show the, is it possible to show the particles of the furnace? Should be. I'm not exactly... Actually, I know why the particles aren't being rendered, and I'm going to change my answer to might be. I know what needs to happen to make that happen, I think, but I'm not sure if it's entirely feasible. Yes. At any rate, that was the demo of chunks vanish here. So I'm gonna put this back and put us back where we were. That sound was just going back where we were. How are you actually doing the movement? Movement of what? And actually, this system is built into SliderCraft, and it's referencing LookingGlass internals, which, as I said, you shouldn't do in practice, but since it's prototyping at the moment, and LookingGlass is kind of the authoritative thing is on my machine anyway, I can play with it a bit more freely. And since I'm not releasing the prototype thing, it doesn't matter. Before I actually release SliderCraft, it will not reference internals. All the things to do this portal render will be supported through LookingGlass via API. Which is part of the reason I'm prototyping it at the moment, so that I can build the API stuff to actually support that. Alright, so... yeah. How was I moving the view just now? I was literally just changing the... it's pretty complicated. I was changing the delta position. So where it thinks the other location was in the other world, it doesn't have to use the camera. That's one of the things, at the moment, at least for my prototype, I don't have to use the camera. I expect that for the LookingGlass API stuff, it will use the camera. Sort of. It will use the camera's position and stuff. And orientation to determine which way the portal looks. But otherwise, yeah. It's actually using my player object. Like, the player object in this world is temporarily being used in the other world. Swapping back and forth for this render. I'm surprised that works. What's SliderCraft? It's an add-on for Mistcraft that I'm working on that provides some interesting features for basically some fun gameplay stuff. Can you go through the magic space hole? Not yet. The first version of SliderCraft that supports that will basically just be you hit it and then you TPX to the other dimension. So it'd be a lot like walk up, TPX 5. And I'm here. Just like that. That's what that will do. For the first versions of it. I'd like to get smooth transition, but I have a lot of data syncing stuff to do first. And this age is loading really slowly. There you go. Lots of that has to do with Skylands and the version of Forge I'm on. So wait, you're technically in both worlds? No. I'm only in the overworld. But for rendering that world, it pretends that the player object is in that world when doing the rendering. Can you see SliderCraft portals through SliderCraft portals? Basically, are portals recursive? And the short answer to that is not yet. SliderCraft portals, or these portal renders in general, while it will be technically possible to do recursion in the future, at the moment the entities aren't synced, and this portal is an entity. If it were blocks, then that would be a different matter. And that would probably work, actually. I haven't checked. When you look around, the sky changes. So I'm doing this, and this is basically... When I'm doing this rendering, I'm cheating and I'm skipping a whole bunch of calls and things just so because this is a prototype. Those are some things I need to clean up and fix and make it so it's working properly. But it's not rendering the sky for the other world. It also doesn't render weather. It will be fixed later. But for right now, I just haven't bothered to put those things in. Yeah, it's just rendering issues. Nothing particularly major. Can you see the same view on the other side? No, you can't. The portal is one way. Slidercraft portals will be one way. Worth noting. Eventually, to you. Alright. That was a strange noise. It's a very small opening for the lid here. Alright. So that is that. Okay. Well, I have work in the morning. Not in Slidercraft soon, no. No, actually, okay, so somebody asked, can you see the other side of the portal? Nope. Ho! That's a weird effect. Okay. Can the viewports be glued to the player HUD instead of blocks? You mean like a GUI render? Yeah. If you want to have a camera view just rendered on the HUD, that's easy. I can use this as texture on my blocks, I assume. Any issues with anything I should keep in mind? Showing 3 sides at the same time with different camera each, or... You can use LookingGlass to produce textures for your blocks. It's just a texture. Things to keep in mind: keep track of your world views well. That's the biggest thing. You can reuse the same world view if you're trying to display the same camera output to different screens. So if you can do that, do that. Yeah. Let's see here. I'm imagining a bauble with a rear view mirror once the entities are rendered. Don't use LookingGlass for same world nearby renders, because it is copying a world over. Basically, if you want to render something that's 3 blocks away from you, you probably don't want to use LookingGlass to do it. You can, it will work, but LookingGlass, at the moment at least, does not reuse the current dimension. And solving that is a bit hard without creating LookingGlass's own copies of the world and chunks and things like that, and I really want to avoid doing that for particular reasons down the road. But yeah, reusing the existing current dimension is a bit hard. I might come up with some clever ways to do it for just reusing the current dimension, but we'll see. The biggest thing is using, if you want to render something in the same dimension but a long ways away, then the special casing either has to not work in this case, or pull the chunks for that area and so forth, and then since it's the current world, there's good chances they'd be unloaded and things like that. Alright. When is Slidercraft coming out? When all the API stuff is done. Mistcraft, I released a build just a little bit ago of Mistcraft, and aside from updating to using the most current LookingGlass API, I also included features for flagging dimensions, or specifically ages, as dead, and for recycling dimensions. And what that means is I can set a dimension as dead. Nobody can link to it, and anybody logging in it is shunted to the home dimension, which is by default the overworld. And let's see here. There's several things for shunting people away and making it so dead dimensions behave or don't behave or don't do things. They do behave, but they behave a particular way. And then the second thing for this is that these dimensions can be recycled. So if when you create a new dimension, if any dimensions are marked as dead, they will be deleted, their data replaced with a new dimension. So we can reuse dimension IDs that way. This is mostly Slidercraft will use this so that you can bounce back and forth between basically two dimension IDs. Rather than creating 1,000 dimension IDs and only ever being in the dimension once and having no real easy way to get back and so forth. The idea for Slidercraft is that the dimension will be marked as dead. It also means that creating link books to a Slidercraft dimension is pointless because the dimension will be marked as dead. You won't be able to go back there. And the link book will not point to the... When the dimension is recycled, it gets a new unique identifier. So it's the same dimension ID, but internally Mistcraft has a universally unique identifier for each dimension now. And if that doesn't match what's in your book when you created it, then you won't be able to link there then either. So, alright. I don't have to do any link book tracking in order to pull this off. That's the beauty of this particular solution. Yes, my ages have UUIDs stored in the data now. At the moment, all the information for Slidercraft is on the Mistcraft forums. There's a somebody posted something about timed books or timer books or something like that, and they based the concept on sliders, and I responded, and my response is what Slidercraft will be. How do dimensions get marked as dead? There is a command. It is highly experimental. It is intentionally made slightly difficult. It uses the Mist debug system. I have a fairly complex debug command with a full hierarchy tree thing going on in the background. My debugging is pretty cool, actually. But yeah, let's create a dimension -10. And then go there. So this will take a minute as the dimension is created and loaded up and everything, and oh look, it's raining! Will Slidercraft be able to go to the existing dimensions? It's possible, but I don't think I'll make it do that. Alright, I seem to have arrived. It is really... Whoa! I was about to complain it's really dark here, but it's not dark anymore. Please stop raining. That's better. Alright, so, this age has a lot of lava. Okay. So, now we're here. Mist debug run ages dimension 10. This only exists when the dimension is loaded. So, that's why I had to come here to do this. And then... experimental. I missed it. Mark dead. So I even put it in the command that it's experimental. Dimension 10, or -10, marked as dead. So now if I leave the dimension, I cannot return. Nope, nothing. Would not go. If I were to use some other mod or means of teleportation or something to get there, it would immediately send me back. So, or not back, actually, it would send me home. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so... highly experimental, intentionally difficult 7. Alright, so... do you have plans to implement dynamic chunk loading for large-scale renders, like... maybe chunk loading for the worldview, or the proxy worlds and things can be done. It probably will be done at some point in the future when syncing and things works. But at the moment, I'm not going to worry about it. It was targeted at minimization for data. Can that mark the Nether as dead? No, it only works on Mistcraft Ages. Alright, so -10 is dead. I can now... I don't know if I could do this. 1 is already registered, so that actually tries to register first. If I were to create a... let's just make whatever this is. Recycling! And I need a link panel. We're there. There we go. 1 link panel. Descriptive book. Yes. Okay. I no longer have any available slots. So I'm going to put some on the floor. My next testing world, I'm going to lay out in a more intelligent fashion and have places for lots and lots and lots of test books. And then specific kinds of testing lined up in certain places. Alright. So, recycling is written... I don't remember what was written. I had a breakpoint, so we just paused. We are recycling a dimension. So I'm going to switch over to... my breakpoint was in the recycle code, because apparently I was testing that last. So if I look... you can't see that, so let's see if we can... make it so you can. Mistcraft.deaddims. There we go. So the only thing in there is -10. It's the only dimension that is marked as dead at the moment. I didn't have any leftovers from my earlier tests. So we're about to reuse that dimension ID. We'll get down here. We went somewhere. I don't know where we went. I'm going to toggle downfall. We're apparently in 46. So we did not recycle the dimension. Probably because it was actually loaded. At least on the file system. So we couldn't actually succeed in deleting the... dimension data. Alright, so let's go back and try it. Whoop! That's my face. Alright, yes, I use Eclipse. Alright. Still can't go, which is good. Alright, so let's make sure my breakpoints are in place and ready to go and so forth. Alright. Do the same thing again. I should probably mark the dimensions I'm creating for recycling as dead. So I'll recycle them. I wanted a link panel. That's it. Go. Go through here. Dead dim still includes -10. Dimension ID equals null. Why is that? We didn't get... Ah! If I query the dimension manager for the world object, it's still there. It didn't fully unload. That's interesting. Yeah, so -10 is still loaded for some reason. The dimension manager has the world objects loaded. Didn't unload properly. That's why I won't recycle. But yeah. So it would if it weren't loaded. But that's what the new mechanism stuff. Sorry. That's the new mechanics of recycling, and we're teleporting to an age now. All right. Whee. This is definitely the age that I wrote. There's 4 suns in this age. They're all synchronized and orbiting from cardinal directions. I created this age because I was talking about it with some friends. I was talking about Mistcraft and the stuff I'd written for, and I'm like, can you do this? And I went, yes. So I did it. It's like, okay. Things you can do with Mistcraft. Alright. Could you forcibly TPX out all players in a dim and then unload it when you mark it as dead to stop that happening? Tatooine to the extreme, yes. And awesome suns. When the dimension is marked as dead, I could technically forcibly eject everybody in the dimension. Just go through all players in the dimension and send them home. Or somewhere else, wherever I feel like sending them, really. But I haven't done that because excuse me. I'd like to leave that up to the mod that is doing things for sending things as dead. So... yeah. Is there a file where the dead marker is saved? The dead flag is actually saved in the age data. So if you set something as dead and go, shoot, you can shut everything down, go modify the age data, and then load from there, and it will not be marked as dead anymore. The list of what's dead is actually rebuilt when the game starts. So I'm going to try shutting down now. And starting back up. Myrathi suggests an X parameter to the mark dead command to force that. Maybe for the commands in the experimental stuff, that could be done. But that's not really a command. The mark dead is, it doesn't take parameters. It doesn't work that way. I could possibly make it so it could take parameters. But that system was mostly designed for reading and setting values. Taking parameters is a bit outside of its scope. How many monitors do you have? Just two. Alright, this is a laptop. So I'm running the game on a laptop. And then over here I have a monitor that's plugged into the laptop. Yeah, the command is a placeholder. It is just there for experimental use so that I can test it, basically. It is a testing command. I left it in there so that if people really want to use it, it's there. But it's a lot like why cheat codes exist in games. Cheat codes exist in games because the developers needed to be able to test things quickly and easily. So they would create cheat codes to be able to test things quickly and easily. But a lot of the time they just didn't bother removing most of them. Because, you know, why bother? So that's why cheat codes are still in games. Alright, Alright, Could the LookingGlass API be used to make a TARDIS mod? Yes, and it is in fact going to be. The specific portal render stuff that I've been demonstrating over here isn't presently available for use in LookingGlass. Oh, that's funny. It kind of unloaded. It just kind of unbuilt the renders, really. But there's actually a TARDIS mod that's being worked on that I'm sort of one of the devs for. Mostly I've just been working on building LookingGlass for it. I have a bat in my base and no morph mod installed. That is in fact a pity. Also ideal for creating Terry Pratchett's Unseen University. Yes, the things you can do. Alright, so I have some very interesting ideas for things I want to do with these more advanced portal things. But they need some work first. Makes me want to make a mirror funhouse in Minecraft. Oh yes. Alright, so that's everything I want to show for the stream, I believe. I don't believe I have anything else that I wanted to cover, and I'm definitely going to have to go back and put together video footage so that we can see the LookingGlass API at more of a glance rather than long stream, because I've been streaming for a while now. Yes. Is LookingGlass just an extension of Mistcraft? All the way around. LookingGlass... Sorry. LookingGlass is its own mod. It is a standalone. It's an API mod. It doesn't do a whole lot by itself. Mistcraft uses LookingGlass. It doesn't need... LookingGlass does not have to be installed for Mistcraft to work. But in order to have these nice, cool link panel renders that I don't know what I'll do without from now on, because they're just so cool looking, you have to have LookingGlass installed. Alright. I like the look of this age, but I think it had lightning. Okay. So, I believe I am signing off this evening. Thank you for joining me for the stream, and I hope to stream again in the near future. I'm actually doing pretty good for streaming more frequently now, so that's good, and I shall see you soon. Ta-ta for now.